bearded man here. I've got Douglas with me, a theist. Oh no! Ah! Anyways, we're going to have a serious conversation at which no point will I be weird or go insane. Well, no, I will be doing nothing. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today, sir. How about you?
Well, aliens kidnapped me earlier, but other than that, I'm fine. They didn't actually
Happens to
do
the
that,
best of
but
us.
yeah, it just
Yeah.
happens, I don't know. So you wanted to have a discussion with me. So randomly, you appeared in one of my many comment things. You're like, "Hey, I
Yeah, my
want to talk
YouTube
to you," and I was like,
algorithm. Yeah.
"Oh, okay, sure." So I'm not really sure what you wanted to talk about per se, but I thought, well, I'd ask what religion you grew up with, if any, and what
hmm
your religion is now. Maybe it's the same, and let's start there.
yeah, I grew up on my father's side. He's a Christian. My parents have been divorced since I was a little kid, and my mom's more or less agnostic. I went to college pretty firmly an atheist. I worked in a biology lab for quite a while, and in doing so, I became what I would consider a deist. I believed in some sort of entity that at least created us. I'd say I at the very least believed in intelligent design, but whatever that was that created us, I didn't think it was down here, helping you find your keys or anything like that. Um, and then I got into law school and I started thinking a little more critically about a lot of these things, and I ended up settling now on Christianity. And I'm not big on the sects of Christianity, the sects, sects like Catholicism or whatever. So I would consider myself um, not to exist in any of those, but non-denominational, I guess, Christian.
Okay, and so you had some interaction with religion and early on, and then
hmm
kind of went through this journey of you didn't really have a belief, but then
hmm
you developed a belief at some point. What, if anything, if there was a key moment, if there was a number of things that led you from I don't believe really in anything to this, I now believe in something that's out there, the
Yep.
deist position.
Yeah, the deistic position came primarily from working in that lab. I used to grow fungus, and the company I would work for would turn it into vegan foods and leather and things like that. And it was often my job to just go what's called scope the inoculum, which means I would just look through a microscope at our chemical soup that contained the small fungus that we'd turn into a larger culture. And in doing so, I'd see sometimes, there were just contaminants and lots of microorganisms and things like that. And I'd looked through a microscope before, kind of doing it day after day and just getting every once in a while, you'd see like a new organism or something. It became very hard for me. This isn't grounded in any specific fact or anything like that. So I'm not going to back it up specifically, at least this point. But to me, it became very hard to say that that wasn't an intelligently designed creature to look at these little tiny, what appear to be essentially really fascinating little robots. I don't know how to describe it any better, but looking through a microscope is a unique experience. Lots of scientists do it every day, and some people come out and they say there's nothing there. And some people come out and they say, like, how could you not believe in intelligent design? And that was the side I settled on there. That's not why I believe what I believe in terms of a Christian sense, but that's definitely what led me in that direction initially.
Right. So you found this phenomenon of microorganisms to be,
hmm
interesting, and that kind of flipped the switch, if you will, and you're like,
hmm
okay, I this looks, I can't really understand. This looks like something designed it, and so you kind of gained this belief. Now, did you ever pause in that and think, well, why do I believe this? Shouldn't I investigate it further? Shouldn't I question this belief that I hold, or is it just an upward progression of belief at that point?
Oh yeah, it definitely was. There was no flip. I can't ever define like a one moment where I looked in the microscope and I was like, no, definitely there's aliens made us or God made us or whatever. No, it was more of a slow transition of just seeing every single unique little organism and how well every single one of them worked, and just how interconnected the whole system was. I There was definitely doubt, and to some extent I still have moments of question, um, of just like realizing I don't understand everything. But yeah, in that time period of my life, I was around 19 at that point. I'm 25 now, and in that time period of my life, I just kind of developed this belief that there's at least probably something. And I would have considered myself a deist at that point, but it wasn't the religion aspect of it wasn't important to me. Just more of a, there's probably something that created us, and that at that point in my life, it didn't develop at all. There was not a whole lot of what I would call critical thinking about the issue. It was more just a gut feeling.
Yeah, that initial burst of kind of a aha moment, or
Hmm.
as gradual as it might have been. um what I've kind of taken as note, as a skeptic, that I used to believe but now I don't,
Hmm.
is that there is this moment or moments where somebody starts to think, well, there's got to be more to this. There's this kind
Hmm.
of I can't explain this. I don't understand this. Therefore, and
Right.
I'm wondering if you, at that time, knew or were aware of logic as far as syllogisms and informal fallacies and things like that, or if that was even on your radar at that
No, I
time.
definitely was, and why I never, why it didn't matter was because it didn't affect my life, and that's what I would go around telling people. Like, sure, I may hold this belief, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't affect my life, and I don't really, I don't try to impose it on anyone else. I don't really care whether or not there's a God. Being a deist implied that he isn't here or it isn't here or whatever it was, it isn't here affecting my daily life. So my philosophy was that, like, sure, this is just my gut reaction when I feel this, um, but who cares? It doesn't matter. In that regard, I could be wrong, but that's kind of how I developed that belief. It, like I said, it wasn't until later when I started to um, delve specifically into Christianity, and among other religions as well, but specifically into Christianity, when I developed a sort of understanding for, well, if I'm going to ground my life in this, I need to have some sort of logical background for it. I need to ground it in something real.
Right, right. Okay, and so you had this idea, this belief,
Hmm.
and you also had an additional belief that you didn't that belief didn't really matter.
Hmm.
And so you now have essentially two beliefs. You believe that your belief doesn't really matter, and it's like, yeah,
Hmm.
sure, I think that, but that's not going to affect me. And so, because of that, there's basically no point where you question whether or not holding a belief will matter. To is that fair to?
Yeah, I think that's at that point in my life. Definitely, I would say that's a fair statement of my reaction to it. For instance, I relate it to, like, I actually knew somebody who was a flat earther when I was in college, and she was really funny to talk to. And because I would talk to her about gravity, like, if because I like to go through logical arguments as well, even back then, and I would say, like, sure, let's just say the Earth is flat. Like, to our daily life, it does not matter whether it's flat or not. You and I both know that it's not flat, but what I essentially told her was, like, if you're going to convince people that it's flat, if that's important to you to convince people of your belief, you need to show how that works. And for me, I'm a round earther because I have a theory of gravity that doesn't work in a flat system, but clearly works in our daily life. And I went through the math with her and I showed her like, um, if this were true and we were just accelerating upwards, because that's what most flat earthers believe, that not that that gravity is pulling us down, but that we're actually just accelerating upwards at a certain 9.8 meters per second squared, right? This is the speed we would be going now if the Earth were only like 6,000 years old or whatever, because I think she was young Earth creationist as well. And the speed that we would have been going would have been like faster than the speed of light. So it I hope opened her eyes to that whether or not like what your belief is, if you want others to believe it, then you have to have some sort of grounding or reasoning for that. And so that's why it didn't matter to me at that point, because I wasn't trying to impose that on anybody else. I was just like, I looked through the microscopes and it felt accurate to me, and I'm not asking anyone else to believe it, and it doesn't affect me. So
Right. Yeah, the flat Earth thing is a lesson in cognitive dissonance, because you can walk the person through the math, you can do a number of things with them, and they will absolutely reject it. And one wonders, what it would take to really convince them. And I think it's essentially they'd have to see that it's round, but I wonder even if that would work, because
oh yeah, no, I know.
if you could, slowly, take them into space, you both, before you launch, you both agree that the window is really a window and not like,
right.
You show them the process of making the window so they know there's no microchips or whatever in it, or, and you agree that it's not, you have a contract, whatever. And so it's like, you get up there and you look down and you're like, see, and they're like, my eyes must be playing, they're going to say something to justify.
I think to some extent that's, if anyone has some sort of firm belief, they're gonna like that's gonna be their reaction regardless. If you, I think there's a lot of people who they'll say like, well, God has to appear to me for him to be real to me, and even if he did, would you wonder, was that actually God, or was that some sort of higher dimensional being playing a trick on me, or was that an alien, or am I in a coma? Like there's in like an immeasurable amount of fake explanations you can rationalize anything with. So yeah, like unfortunately that's part of the human condition, that we're just sometimes going to believe what we want to believe. And so that's why when I came to it, I knew that there wasn't going to be something scientific or mathematic that I thought was going to change my mind. My wife came to Christianity through primarily apologetics, which I'm sure you've encountered dealing with this. And so she's a young Earth creationist. She believes that Genesis is more of a science textbook, and I am not opposed to the idea, but I just don't know for sure. And what I do know is that I can go through certain logical arguments without having to just trust what another scientist has put in front of me, or what someone else who a statistician has maybe messed with or made appear in a certain way that he wants to.
Yeah. So, when did, I guess, what the, okay. When did Christianity appear in your life? How did you get involved with that?
Yeah, well, like I said, I went to church every other week. My parents were divorced, but they had part-time custody. So every other week I would go to church with my dad and my stepmom. And I would say they're very different type of Christian than they used to be. They don't go to church now. And I think that's partially because the church is, when you read the Bible and you understand a lot more of the historical context, the church feels odd oftentimes. And I'd love to be able to find a church that I felt made sense, but I still haven't to this day. But so I grew up Christian in that regard. And then I didn't really do anything else with it until so she was my fiance at the time, or at least no, actually she might have been. She was my girlfriend at the time. My wife now, and she was a Christian when we met, and she would have these arguments with me, and I would just ask her like, "Can you show me some proof or have some reason for what you believe?" And oftentimes she'd send me the apologetic stuff that she believes in, and like I said, the problem with it is that like any kind of science, having worked in the science field for a little while, you understand that any kind of science can be twisted to just fit your narrative. You can draw a graph that has a funny looking y-axis so that it appears in the way that you want it to appear, but really it's not as catastrophic as it says it is or whatever, you know what I mean? So I have trouble believing those kinds of things just flat out. I'm a pretty skeptical person. Um, so I actually got into Christianity through literature, which was my major in college. And so I had worked at this lab, but it was just kind of a side job. It wasn't like my field was not science. It was just kind of things that I did secondarily. But the literature of it was really fascinating to me. So my girlfriend at the time had been wanting me to get into Christianity and read it more often. And so I was writing a D&D campaign about giants. And I was like, well, where am I going to get good giant lore? I know a lot of it already, but like what text should I do? And so I started thinking like, well, there's giants in the Bible. Maybe I should, get some literature from that, just get some inspiration for my campaign. And when I did so, I started to read all this interesting um, biblical information about the Nephilim. I don't know if you know much about them, but essentially the leading theory on that doctrine is that the sons of God, which are supposed to be the angels, came down and bred with the human women and created these giants or heroes or whatever you want to call them. And I got really, really into the literature, and there was something about the literature that just seemed very real, even if it was poetic. And that's something I learned um, well in college, is that there can be things that are true that aren't or powerful or useful that aren't necessarily physically true. So, well, Genesis may like I'm not sure, and I personally don't really think so. I think the Earth is probably a lot older than 60,000 years old, but could be wrong. I wasn't there. Uh, well, there can be things that are true in a spiritual sense. They might not be true in a physical sense. So there can be life lessons that you can learn from things. And it was more about the story of evil and the story of like how specifically things can be corrupted that were once a good thing, and now can be corrupted into something perverse or evil. For instance, you can have a divine or righteous wrath, but there's a way to become wrathful in a sinful or evil way. You can have a divine or righteous love, but then you can twist that into lust. And all of these good things were twisted into evil things essentially in a lot of these stories, and that was really interesting to me. So I actually wrote the campaign on it based off that. It was pretty fun to play through, but that's what got me reading it, and it was really the literature stuff that compelled me.
It's funny because there are a number of fundamentals that were against D&D, and is
I know.
satanic and all that. So it's like it will lead you to the devil. Well,
Hmm.
you know, you showed
I know,
them.
it's very ironic.
Like, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
well, D&D, you could, that's your book. If you write a book, how D&D made me a Christian, that will
Yep,
really confuse people. Uh,
yep. No, it's a funny story because my nephews love D&D, and I'm like their hero uncle right now because I'm into it and I can speak their language. But my brother, he's about 10 years older than me or so. He he doesn't know what the heck they're talking about ever, and I always do. and his in-laws don't like that they play D&D. It's like a big deal for them, and so when he found out that story about me, he's like, I'm gonna have to tell him that, because he doesn't mind his kids playing D&D. He knows it's harmless. It just like anything, it's how you play it, but um, it's literally about fighting evil. Like, I don't know, in general, most campaigns, especially the ones my
Yeah.
nephews are going to be playing.
There's a really bad movie based off of a Trick Track, Mazes and Monsters, with
Okay.
Tom Hanks, very young Tom Hanks. That's just, you gotta watch.
Okay.
It's about he and his friends start doing D&D, and it sends him down this dark path. And then there was another one that's fan made based off another Trick Track, and I cannot recall its name off the top of my head, but that one is like beautiful. It's so good. Like they really put an effort into it. I'll put that when I look it up. I'll put it in the description, because I don't want to spend too much time on it. But yeah, those are fun. It's fun to see that sort of myth and fantasy that we know is not real, and that the people are reacting to it as if it is real, in that it will, like, if you roll the you're performing a spell in the game,
Right.
so therefore you're performing a spell in reality, and that's going to summon a demon, and it's going to do this and that, and it's like, is it though? I mean,
Yeah.
like,
whatever magic is, it's a lot harder to do than that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Right. Or because you've killed a thing in the game, you're killing them in your mind, and so that means you're really killing them for real, in a sinful way. You're wanting to kill, and so you're all this sort of satanic panic that rose up during the late 80s. Very interesting phenomenon, a very interesting journey from just kind of a neutral belief to believing in this specific thing through the literature.
It was a lot more complicated than that, but that's
right.
What
We're just simplifying it. Obviously, we're just simplifying it for time and whatnot. So, all right. Bye. Get out of here. All right. Yeah. Get out of here. All right. So my brothers love you. So okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. No more interruptions. Okay, everybody, walk behind me more. Okay. Sorry. Very professional channel. So I'm a skeptic, and I've been a skeptic.
Yeah.
Goodness, 11 years now, I suppose. And I was a believer my whole, from 8 to 32. So I know, if you will, kind of both sides of the coin there. And when I learned informal logic, that really is kind of what changed me. I had already gone through looking for the historical evidence of these things, especially Christianity, and finding nothing, and finding lots of frauds. Ron Wyatt was a big thing at the time. So it's like, you don't lie if you have the truth. So it didn't make sense. So I didn't appear to have any empirical evidence of these stories being actually true. And then I found apologetics. I thought, oh, this will save it. This will, and I learned all of them, and I memorized them, and I thought they were great. And when I learned informal logic, it's like, oh, there's problems. So I'm wondering, because you spoke of, knowing something about logic and knowing some arguments. You said something that I really want to focus in on.
Sure.
You said that things can be true in one way. Now I'm kind of paraphrasing. Correct me if you.
Yeah.
But not true in another way. So kind of like
in a physical sense. I think things can be true in a spiritual sense, but not necessarily a physical one. And I, you know, I could be wrong about that, but what I'm getting at is that you can tell a story that has truth and value and meaning that never happened, right? So what I'm saying there is like, take for instance, C.S. Lewis books on Narnia. Um, they never happened, right? At least as far as the physical sense is concerned. But they still have truth to them, that you can find meaning in there. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not me. You know, I see Christians in your comments, and I hope they, when they hear me say that, they don't think I'm saying like the resurrection never happened or something like that. Um, but what I'm getting at is like there might be poetic aspects to specifically Genesis that we don't know about. Um, for instance, I'm not opposed. My definitely my wife and a lot of other people are opposed to the idea of what's called co-atomism, which is the idea that there were other people besides Adam and Eve, but Adam and Eve were the chosen two to become, you know, essentially the priests of God. And I'm actually more drawn to that idea specifically because after Cain is kicked out of the family after killing his brother, it's never explicitly said there's more people. We know eventually there's more people, but he says, "Well, when I'm going out and traveling, there are going to be people who find me and they're going to want to kill me." Who are those people he's talking
Yeah,
about? Like
suddenly
everyone
there's a whole
theoretically
bunch of
would know
people,
his name.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I'm not opposed to the idea of co-atomism, for instance, but the Bible doesn't say, "Hey, by the way, co-atomism happened and
no,
there were
right.
more
He would have
people."
he
You know?
would have had to be with his mom or his
Yeah.
sister, and
Right.
you know, and
Hmm.
that's just like, yeah, that's okay. There's a whole bunch of people. I guess they're his
Right.
brothers and sisters, and I don't
Yeah.
know.
And
But
that's
yeah,
why I'm not opposed to the idea of a localized flood versus a global flood. You know, I wasn't there. I don't know,
right,
but
right,
that's what I mean when I say something can be true, but not, you know, exactly
yeah,
physically
right.
true. When it
Well,
says the whole world, it might have been their whole world or
right.
something.
The you know, I enjoy poetry, and I think you know that we can find all sorts of ways of looking at that sort of thing. Like
Hmm.
William Blake's The Tiger. It's a beautiful thing, and it's like it could be about anything. It could be about a fight between heaven and hell. It could be about
Hmm.
mortality. It could be about any just whatever, because it's art. It's subjective.
Hmm.
um but when you say the word truth, for me, that means a specific framework. And of course, that definitions are hard to nail down. So,
Hmm.
is real versus is fantasy? Would that be a fair distinction?
That that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think.
Okay.
And fantasy can have what I would call true or important elements to it,
Yeah.
even if it's not reality.
Yeah, the story can
Yeah.
have some significance, or some cultural impact or personal impact or what
Right.
have you, and we can draw that from, well, anything, and we do. I mean, even when we read text, like now in chat or what have you,
Hmm.
we interpret that, we give people personas based on that.
Right.
And I remember my early days of the internet. I fall in love, it seemed like, in internet chat, and it's like you don't have any idea who that person is,
Right.
not even a little, and you're not in love. You're in love with the idea of being in love, perhaps,
Right.
but you don't know anything about that person.
Right.
And but you're young, and you're full of adrenaline and whatever. You're full of a
Hmm.
bunch of bull.
Yeah.
And so you find yourself in this fantasy realm where you kind of you believe it's real.
Yep.
you know and so, but when it's over, when you switch it off, and now as an adult, as a skeptic, I still have that problem of slipping into the fantasy realm of forgetting that these people are really real out there typing things. You can
Hmm.
Because you start to construct this thing of like I'm part of this story, and we're all just in this story, and it's all role play, and it's like, no, it's not. It's really real. You're affecting people, and they're affecting you. And so there's a danger to that. There's a beautifulness that we can do that, but also a danger to that.
And that was, like I said, only really the start to get my interest peaked in Christianity specifically. Because when I read, when you read other mythologies, I don't feel the same truth that I felt there. And again, this is all just a subjective feeling.
Yeah.
Where I crux my faith, essentially, is not on those subjective feelings, because they're important and they pique my interest, but I don't think Christianity, if you can disprove the resurrection, then I don't think Christianity matters. So that's actually where I started to crux my faith. And like I said, I'm a law student. I ended up reading Justice Scalia's really interesting essay on how you could prove, at least in a court of law, the resurrection. And he's not necessarily saying, like, yes, Christianity is true. He's just saying that these are the rules that we have for court of law. This is what we as a society base our values of truth on, and it passes the bar for that. You could prove that the resurrection happened in a court of law.
All right. Well,
which was an interesting topic.
Yeah, I think so. Can you how long is that, or can you summarize that into?
Essentially, it comes down to the fact that we base most of our well, actually pretty much everything that we do off of witness testimony. So if I were to go into court and I want to introduce this document, right? I want to introduce this business organization's book. Well, I can't just introduce it. I have to find somebody who knows something about it and then introduce it through them. So I have to say, deconverted man, have you seen this document? And you might say, yes, I have. What is it? And you tell the court what it is. I, as counsel, can't do anything like that. So what Justice Scalia was essentially saying was that when you come into a courtroom, there are eyewitnesses who are going to come in and say their piece, and you have to let them, as long as it's relevant, generally. And there's some other evidence rules, but no need to get not for this venue. And you have to let them say their piece, and the other side discredits that witness or brings in their own witness to say that other issue. And the jury, being the finder of fact, generally, you can't have judge trials. Mm-hmm. They are the ones to parse out, is this true? Is this not true?
Right.
And the kind of the point was, it comes down to, like, people have to decide, like, people can be wrong, but people have to decide what they think was compelling or true or not. And Scalia's essay on that was essentially saying that, lots of people do think this is true.
Yeah, I'm not into that field. It's outside my expertise, so I have to ask you some questions.
Yeah,
if I'm coming to you, you're not a lawyer per se, you're adjacent to that, whatever we want to pretend in this scenario, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I will be in August.
You will be. Oh, okay, well, great.
I'm in my final semester. I graduate in May, and then I take the bar in July.
Okay. Yeah, that's well. Good luck with that. And if you achieve it, then you're going to be my personal lawyer for free, right?
All right. Yeah, that's how it works.
That's how that works. Because I did an interview with a random YouTuber. You're now obligated. That's sure. Why not? Let's say I have a piece of paper, a document full of whatever, and I say, okay, here, submit this to the court. What do you need to know about that written document?
Primarily, so if you're saying you have a piece of evidence that says, let's say it's a letter, somebody saying they want to murder somebody or something like that, and I want to introduce it in a murder trial, trying to convict this guy. Is that a good example?
Sure.
Yeah, so I have to show my reasons for why I think it's true. And so to submit it to the court, I have to give it to the other side. The other side gets to inspect it. Mm-hmm. I can't, suddenly surprise them unless there's some
Right. The discovery.
unless there's some circumstance where I just found it or whatever. So I
No,
can't surprise people. I have to go show them my evidence, and then I give my piece for why this is true, and I ask whoever found it or whoever, or maybe if they want to testify, I can ask the person about it, and they have to answer the questions about it.
Okay, so
The person who wrote it.
right. So you ask me about it, and I say I don't know who wrote it.
Yeah.
So can it be admitted then?
Yeah. So it still goes into evidence, and the jury gets to see that happen, and they get to see your facial reaction, your facial expressions and your voice when you say that, and they get to determine whether or not they think that's true. And essentially, that's how it boils down. The jury determines issues of fact, unless the judge rules that no reasonable jury could find on any other way than this. So they would have to be saying that a jury would be not reasonable in this under the circumstances.
Yeah. The contents of that document itself, if it was extraordinarily fantastical and said just bizarre things,
like somebody raising from the dead.
Well,
let's just say that.
I mean, let's say somebody turned into a bat. Let's keep it away from the vampire narrative that the person died. There was puncture wounds in their neck. So I'm saying, well, a vampire did it. Here's the thing that says a vampire did it. Who wrote it? I don't know who wrote it. Of course I wrote it, but I'm gonna say I don't know who I wrote it. I'm a good actor. I'm gonna keep saying I don't know who wrote it.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, okay, he says he doesn't know who wrote it, and now it's in evidence and all this. So, what do we? The judge might go, like roll his eyes.
No, actually, there are ways to get around that. The other side, for instance, can object to the chain of custody and say that you say this document came from here, but we have no evidence that a police officer picked it up at the house, like you said. We have no evidence of all of these sorts of things that would constitute you bringing it here in front of us today. It seems like you just made it up, and the judge can say sustained or overruled.
Wouldn't it even be a better objection to just object to the fact that we've never observed anyone turn into a bat? Because if that's in the paper, it's like he turned into a bat and then he sucked the blood out of them. I mean,
right. So our court doesn't have
that doesn't happen.
Yeah. No, our legal system doesn't generally work that way. Most of that will there is something called Twombly and Iqbal. Those are two names of cases, or Twickball is what law professors call it. It's essentially it's usually used for conspiracy cases, and it's essentially a way for judges to say this doesn't exist in reality, so I don't care, I'm throwing it out. Right. And they just won't let your case go forward if your claim is too fantastical. It does happen. And so that's usually the remedy in that regard. And oftentimes, if an insane person files a suit against somebody for kidnapping them and bringing them to Mars, that's usually what a judge will do is throw the case out in that regard.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I recall a story of somebody who was kidnapped, and they were told that this was a spaceship and all this stuff, and of course they realized that was all bull, but for a while they believed it.
Right.
And so that was part of the case, but it was that we knew that the guy knew that he was making it up, and that the person believed it. Doesn't matter,
Right.
But it is up to the judge to decide if it's too non-mundane, and there doesn't. It seems like that's somewhat subjective. I mean, you could question the judge, and you could get a different judge, and keep doing that until you get some judge that doesn't do it, or exhaust your options, I suppose.
Right.
So what makes something fantastical? What makes something non-mundane? What makes something that you toss it out in the first place?
It's a tough question, and it's generally just up to that specific judge. There are some remedies to appeal up those decisions, and like you said, you can exhaust all of those, and maybe no one will hear your claim. What I find fantastic about Christianity in that regard is that people did listen to that claim. People did believe that Jesus rose from the dead because lots of people saw it, according to the documentation, and lots of people had seen him do fantastic things prior to that. Otherwise, why would I agree? Why would you believe that? Like, it just doesn't. It doesn't really add up. I think you're muted if you're talking, by the way.
Professional at work. We'll edit that part out. Nobody will know.
Okay.
Aliens again. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm on this alien roll. I don't know why. So fantastical. Well, I asked the question, how do you personally decide what's too, let's pretend maybe you'll be a judge at some point.
Yeah,
You have to
sure.
decide this is too, this is too much, or, what would be the methodology to determine something as non-mundane,
Mhm.
if you will? Do you have a
Yeah,
methodology in place of that, or have you thought about that, or?
yeah. Luckily enough, it doesn't happen that often to these judges, so they don't have to make those calls. Um, but generally, it's things that are outside of the normal scope of human interaction, and that's what people run with. If you say someone defrauded you, your claim's probably going to be heard. And if you say somebody dragged you to Mars, your claim's probably not going to be heard. It's really, as the court so eloquently put on a case about obscenity, I know it when I see it.
Yeah,
That's the best. That's sometimes the best you can do.
Yeah, I
Language
think
only goes so far.
for pornography, like you'll know it when you see it, kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's something that's hard to pin down
Hmm.
in legalese or something like that, which makes me a bit uneasy. I'm like, but this is just
Right.
it's art. It's
It's
not.
fundamental.
It's
Yeah,
just it's
exactly.
art. You can't say that it's it doesn't look like art anymore. It's like, okay,
Right.
I draw a stick figure. It's like, and then
Yeah.
I had this stick, and now is it porn? No, okay.
Hmm. Right.
At some point,
It's so tough. Yeah.
yeah. Well, so what we have regarding the biblical narratives is we have stories that are written.
Hmm.
We don't know that any of it happened. So we don't actually have the knowledge that people saw it. We have knowledge that the thing says people
Right.
saw it. So you have to believe that any of it is true in the first place for any of that to matter. So why believe it's true in the first place?
Right. Well, I actually think that you can start from a position of the resurrection. I think that you can lead back, you can go backwards in that regard. You don't necessarily have to start from Genesis to then to then go through this channel that the Jews did to get to Jesus. And I mean, in fact, what I think is very fantastic about Jesus specifically is that he was rejected by those who believed his faith. They did not believe that he was,
Well, that
the Messiah.
that's the story, though. That's all in the story.
Hmm. Right. And
So
so they even if, and that's what I'm getting at, is like, even if you have every single bit of evidence in front of you, you still can just say no. It
but
doesn't really matter.
I don't
Go on, sorry.
have any evidence in front of me. I have that it's a story. I don't believe any of it happened at all, not even a
Oh, sure.
little. None of
Yeah, no,
these
I get that.
people exist. And so why should I why should I believe that any of these people existed at all?
So I'm curious, do you believe in a historical Jesus? That there was not divine,
I
but there
don't
was a
have any
person.
evidence of that.
Do you believe in a historical George Washington?
Yes, we have ample evidence of that.
I actually think we have more documentation that Jesus existed, at least as a historical figure,
Mhm.
than than George Washington existed.
Okay.
And that's why I start from that foundation. Okay, well, let's just say he's just a man.
All right. So what would the historical Jesus look like? Where was he born, for example?
Jesus was born in Bethlehem.
According
to a lot of documentation. I mean, I don't have it directly up. If you'd like to do another one, I can prepare more of that kind of
stuff. Absolutely. The Bible. If we have non-biblical things of where he was born, do we have a birth certificate? I don't even know if they did
I got you. Then. No, not particularly.
No.
You know what's funny about that though is like because I had that argument too. Like, okay, well, can you show me something outside the Bible?
Right.
Well, the Bible wasn't like a thing. It wasn't a book written by one person. So it's kind of a logical fallacy to say, can you show me something outside the Bible? Because the Bible is just a collection of the documents, many of the documents about Jesus.
Right. Okay. Well, you could ask questions.
But yeah, we do have Roman censures of biblical figures around it, like Pilate and things like that. So,
because
if I had prepared homework in that regard, I think I would be a lot more prepared.
Well, I'd like to see.
I didn't think about it.
What would the historical Jesus look like? Where was he born? Yeah. When did he live? You know, what did he actually do? What can we figure out? Because he'd just be a guy going around saying stuff about the end times, and he convinced some people to follow him, and then what could we actually know other than that? I mean, none of the characters he interacts with are real, as far as I can tell. You can't. I think maybe a couple of the apostles' names appear later on in history, so maybe you could verify them. But then again, maybe they used historical figures to boost up the of the story. Certainly, John the Baptist, who appears. Was he in that location at that time? Did he show up? Was he there? Or is it just, and of course, Pontius Pilate, was he in that area? What about the laws of the Romans? Were they actually able to sentence somebody in the way that suggested? What about the switching of the two prisoners? Did that happen in any other place or time? Or is that just a fantastical event that's written about? What can we actually know about this person other than what is told in these stories that are too fantastical for me to believe? And I don't know that we can know that much about this person. And I
can tell you one piece of what was considered fantastical evidence, which we now know to be medical evidence, which I didn't know when I started researching this stuff. But when Jesus is on the cross, after he dies, they ask one of the Roman soldiers to make sure he's dead. So he takes the spear and stabs him in the side, and
water comes
blood and water, which is, at the time, people thought that was a mystical thing. Like, oh, clearly he's the Son of God, because why would water? And he'd been talking about living water and things like that. They thought it was some sort of mystical aspect of Jesus. What I think helps confirm that document now is that we know it's not a mystical aspect. We know that essentially when you're being crucified, you're somewhat drowning. As you're sitting there, you have to keep continually moving up. And your lungs begin to fill with water. So his lung was pierced, and both blood and water came out. And so the people at the time thought it was fantastical, and it actually discredited the document. And now I think it actually credits the document. It goes to its point that
I don't know
probably actually happened.
Yeah, I don't know whether people or not thought it was fantastical or not, but I think that they'd be familiar with seeing that, since crucifixion was a primary means of punishment. So you would have seen other people's pierced in the same way. You would have seen that phenomenon happen other places. So you'd be familiar with it.
As far as I understand, it was fairly unique. They usually didn't check. It was specifically in Jesus's case, because he was such a large political and religious figure, that they were like, you better check if he's dead. It wasn't a common practice just to, poke the victims.
Well, there's nothing saying that somebody wouldn't be familiar with that. They wouldn't have seen it before. Or just say that it happened regardless.
No, I don't necessarily.
They could just say, well, let's say it was blood and water, because that sounds cool, and it happened to the line. the whole thing
Mhm.
fabricated. I don't see. There's too many leaps of beliefs that one must make, from my perspective, to
Right.
believe that any of this happened at all. You have a person, that dies. Okay, sure, they're dead. End of story. It's not a very interesting story, but of course, the believers of that person and their tellings that the world is ending. Basically, that's Jesus's narrative, essentially. Don't worry about today. Don't worry about what you put in your mouth. All these things that kind of hint at an apocalyptic type of preacher. Um, some of many of you will know the end times. Some of you will die before then.
Mhm.
This sort of
Yeah, well, specifically, he tells you to not, not focus on the end, to carry on now,
yeah,
and do your duties in
yeah,
this
of
world.
course, like
Yeah.
many mystical people, end times preachers, you have to sprinkle a little. Oh yes, yes. So then it's
Mhm.
coming soon, but we don't know when. So keep living until it comes. But it's coming, you know.
Mhm.
And so whoever it was believed that. All you need is one other person really to get things rolling. We
Yeah.
know that from Mormonism. All it takes is one person to agree with you to get the ball rolling. And then your made up story gains more traction. And of course it morphs and changes over time. Each telling of the story is going to change. Uh,
Mhm.
and of course, with Mormonism, we have that somebody was actually skeptical and was brilliant. They took the writings and they hid them or destroyed them. And I forget who it was, but it was a woman. I remember that part. And she said, "Okay, you really caught this from the you know golden things. Go get
Right.
it again then." And of course, he couldn't reproduce it exactly because he's
Right.
making it up. So he comes up with a new thing. And she's like, "Yeah, okay, you're a charlatan." That should have been the end of it, but it didn't matter. The people that believe didn't care, and they've tried to say, "Oh, that, you know, make all sorts of excuses, even just say that never happened."
Mhm.
So if somebody like that happened, and I'm writing the story, I'm like, I'm not even going to include that event happened because that's going to ruin the story. Yeah, so
Sure.
and I don't, and that's the thing. It's like, who wrote it? We don't even know that. Somebody somewhere did. Did they get paid to do it? Did they believe it themselves? I don't know. When was that piece of paper found? Who found it? Where? When? Why did we save that piece of paper rather than, well, it's history, but still, you know, there's all these questions that just mount on each other, especially,
Mhm.
how did we decide what canon was? That's an interesting rabbit hole to go
Oh,
down.
right. No, I that the Council of
A
Nicaea is
bunch of
very
people, yeah,
fascinating.
they just decided. They just prayed about it. They just
Have you,
decided.
as a just a little fun aside, have you heard the Santa Claus story at the Council of Nicaea?
I didn't know that was involved at all.
So
I thought it was
The
St.
actual
Nicholas
Saint
was.
Nicholas was there at the council.
Oh, was he?
The
Well, of
original
course.
Saint Nicholas was there at the Council of Nicaea, and I guess some heretic wanted to include text that he didn't think was canon, and he punched him in the face.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
So Santa
yeah,
Claus punched a heretic in the face
sure.
when deciding what the Bible should be.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so it appears to me that we have a number of stories that you can see poetically, and I agree. Yes, you can
Oh,
take
some, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Specifically, Genesis, I think, has a
yeah,
lot of poetic elements.
right.
For
Well,
instance,
I think
the
yeah,
ages of the or early men could mean a lot more than just a physical age and more of a good, well-rounded life.
could the entire story of Jesus be poetical, not actual?
Hmm.
We're gonna say fantastical, but
Yeah.
still, would that affect you in some way, shape, or form? I mean, it would kind of change what you believe in one way, but not in another way. You could
Hmm.
still think, well, there's I don't know if there's a God or not, but I because the messages are what matters more than the the accuracy, if you will. Would
Right.
that be a way of possibly looking at it? It's like it didn't really happen, but I still can get something from it. Could that happen? And if so, what do you think that would
Yeah,
mean?
no, that it's a good question. It would affect me. Well, I think Genesis has a lot of poetic elements. I don't think you see that same kind of literature in the Gospels specifically, um, and that would definitely affect the religion. Like that's the key thing about Christianity is that Jesus rose from the dead. If he didn't, what's the point? He's just some crazy guy in the woods, right?
Mm.
So he has to actually do so for it to have meaning. Otherwise, he is subject to death, just like any other person. And what's the point?
Well, but
Um,
you had said it. If it could have this poetic meaning, maybe
mhm.
it has that meaning there. It has a poetic meaning that he didn't really rise from the dead, but the idea that he did, that's what matters. The reality doesn't matter.
I think if that were true, you would not be a Christian. You might be something else,
Right.
but you would not be what I would call a Christian because the physical reality of life is very important to Christianity.
Hmm.
And in fact, a lot of people, have this misconception that, oh, when we die, we're all going to heaven and then we'll just be up there in the clouds or whatever. That's not what the text says. What the text says
Hmm.
is that we're going to get a new reality, essentially. Like there will be a new earth, there will be a new Eden, more or less, and you will walk along it, right? Like you will, but the worlds will be combined. You will have access to heaven in certain regards. Um, but even today, if you're a believer and you die, you don't go to what we would call heaven. You go to what we would call paradise, which seems to be a different locality, at least.
Hmm. Yeah, there's all the many problems that I have with the system itself of judgment and all that. That's kind of
Hmm.
its
I
own
did
thing.
too. That's
Uh,
a whole thing for
yeah,
me.
it's a whole nother
That
can
was a
of
big
worms.
hurdle for me. I'm very
I'm
libertarian,
Yeah,
so
I'm more interested in the mechanics of
yeah.
the epistemology is what I'm trying to get at with you is
Yep.
what is your method of deciding, hey, I can't believe this is baloney. I'm going to throw this out in my court. I'm
Right.
not going to represent that person, whatever. And and it's just I haven't really heard what your method would be to decide this is fantastical and this is mundane. What is your
Right.
methodology to deduce that, to decide that?
Right. Unfortunately, like I said, there is an element of the obscenity law that I mentioned. Like I know it when I see it, and I think we've been ingrained with the ability to determine truth from untruth, essentially, um, or fallacy. And what really changed my mind on a lot of these things was understanding that God, in fact, was not tyrannical. At least the biblical God, was not tyrannical. And when you look at old, you know, um, there's a lot of stories where, and there's memes of it and stuff, where it seems like God is just screwing with people. For instance, the story of Abraham and Isaac.
Joe,
He brings Abraham, Job too, yeah. But he brings Abraham up
yeah,
the mountain,
the
and he's like, hey, sacrifice your son. And
right,
then last minute he says, don't do that.
yeah,
Well, I was actually having a conversation with my best buddy the other night about this. That to when you read it without context, seems like God is just messing with people, like a kid burning ants with a
yeah.
magnifying glass.
There's a C.K. Lewis skit on that's hilarious.
Hmm.
Somebody animated it.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like, right? But
Yeah,
when you
God's
find
a
out,
shitty girlfriend. Yeah,
right, you find out that that's actually couldn't be further from the truth. The whole point of this story of Abraham and Isaac is that God is showing Abraham how hard it would be to sacrifice your own son. And then when Abraham gets to the top of the mountain, he says, "No, no, I've provided the sacrifice for you. You don't actually have to do this." And then
allegory
God,
for
and then
what
later
an allegory for what's coming.
for
Right,
Jesus, right? And then later on in reality, and Abraham might have never understood this, unless, and we don't really know what his connection with God was, but he might not have understood that that was an allegory for what's to come for Jesus. Jesus is actually going to be the sacrifice. And so it was never a specific breaking point, like yes, Christianity is true. It was actually more of a spider web that was built over time, kind of like the Beautiful Mind thing, where he's got all the things connected to the other
Yeah,
things.
right.
Yeah, it was more of like a wow. So that was written thousands of years before Jesus came into being, but
Mm.
it's clearly about Jesus. And
Well,
so a lot of things like
post hoc, post hoc it is, after the fact you can, but you can make it
Mhm.
that way. Of course, whoever wrote it could be very well aware of that story in the Bible and say, I'm going to
Yeah,
make this mirror that. It's poetry, it rhymes, as George Lucas said about the prequels. It's the same, but it's different.
right.
Uh, I like the Darth Maul theory, or Darth Jar Jar theory. I think that
Yeah, that's my favorite one too. I
yeah,
really
it's like
like
that would have made so much sense
it. Would
that
have been
if
so good.
why didn't he just do that in the first movie? That would have
Yeah,
been and be like, oh, it all that makes this
right.
movie amazing. But
Like you go back now and you look at the scene
oh,
where he's like at the council and he's doing
yeah,
that. It's so
oh,
yeah, it's so
right,
perfect.
yeah, he's so manipulative, and he's
Yeah.
acting the fool. And he just have this one scene where he's like. Yeah.
Yep.
But anyways, whatever. Yeah, but that I guess that is really where we have the epistemology question has always been, I think, the core of what differentiates the theist and the skeptic
Hmm.
of I have this analytical approach to all these things, and like you said, you would have to come very prepared, and I'd be interested in that.
I'd
You
be
should
happy to do it again. Yeah.
email me those things, because I don't know if it would be a good
Hmm.
conversation per se, but maybe it would be to say, well, what would the historical Jesus look like? Because as far as I know, no one's ever been able to construct a coherent timeline of Jesus
Hmm.
based on the Bible.
Right.
So
And
it would
unfortunately, I doubt there would be anything that's perfect.
yeah,
In the
yeah,
same
because
way that you might be able to construct a
align the
historical timeline of
pilots over here, and you
someone
can't
today or whatever.
you can't get him where he needs to be in time.
Oh,
So
I
there's
see what you're saying. Okay.
there's so yeah, it's very difficult, right? It's very so even his age and all this, because he might have not died at 33. That's there, but maybe
Hmm.
that's numerology, because the Jews love numerology. So, you know, it's really difficult. And then of course maybe maybe but it's either no, it's not. I can never remember if it's Bethlehem or Nazareth. I think it might be Bethlehem, that might not have even existed. Then you have
Hmm.
that problem. So one of the places that they're supposed to live didn't even exist yet. It
Yeah.
does exist later, but at the time it doesn't. And
Hmm.
of course you have the domestication of camels. What are you going to do with that? They weren't domesticated. So, I have all these. Well, that's earlier in the book. But anyways,
Hmm.
you have a lot of problems that you have to tackle. Um, but yeah, you have kind of beliefs on, if you will, beliefs on top of beliefs that allow you to say to yourself, at any rate, I can accept that this is really true, even though it appears fantastical to somebody
Right.
else. And you understand where I'm coming from, I would assume, presume, if
Oh yeah.
like, yeah, well,
I respect skeptics a lot, actually.
oh, well, thank you. We
Yeah.
we, we appreciate that. Yeah, no, nobody. It's so hard. Anyways, but my default kind of go to is like, well, can we agree that lobsters exist? And it's like, at least can we, start with the
Right.
basics? Reality is
Right.
real. Yes, okay, great. Because
Yes.
I've had people
I
like,
yeah.
no, reality is not real. I'm like, I can't do that. There's not. I
Right.
can't.
Exactly. That's my philosophy. Is like, okay, let's just say whatever
Yeah,
reality
start
isn't
there.
real.
Yeah, let's just
You
start
still
with
have to
that.
eat. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you believe in that regard. You're still gonna get hungry.
There's
Um,
Are you familiar with Star Trek Next Generation at all?
yeah, a little bit. A little bit.
Okay. There's now I can't remember the name, but there's an episode with Worf, and he's having a spiritual struggle, and
Hmm.
he's in these caves meditating, and then Kalis, who's supposed to returns. And so he's very not happy about this. He doesn't believe, he doesn't know, and they test Kalis, and it's like, yeah, it's Kalis, it's his DNA. So it's like, wow, and then there's people on the ship that are praying to Kalis and all this, but Kalis doesn't seem like this mystical hero to Worf. So and then by then we find out he's a clone and all this. It's like, well, does it matter?
Sure.
And of course, but people believe anyways. And he's like, and so Kalis says to Worf, says, maybe it doesn't matter if Kalis, as we understood him, even existed. What matters is if the teachings were honorable. And I look at that and I say, there's a way that you could look at any religion and say, it doesn't matter whether it's true. I don't think it's true, but you could still find honorable teachings and use those. But of course, you'd have to, well, from your perspective, you wouldn't be at least true Christian would be the fallacy, but you'd be a very different type of Christian who didn't believe that Jesus actually existed, didn't believe that, or if he did, he's not this guy, but find value in the story anyways. But basically, you're still believing in a story rather than what's really real. And I guess that's why for you it matters that you think it really occurred, and you think you have some arguments or ways to persuade this jaded skeptic of that, which I would love to go down that rabbit hole. And I guess I would still have the problem, but we've never observed any other human doing this. So what happens there physically,
Right.
So,
no, I'm there with you.
It's like, is it, what is it, just magic, or is there something physical being done to the body that's maybe Jesus is Wolverine, why not? He's a mutant with regenerative powers. I could go with that. I'm like, okay, that's more mundane, but it's still fantastical. But at least there's something to go on. It's kind of like the midichlorians of Star Wars, where you reduce this
or
fantastical
Thor being a god, but he's really just an alien.
Yeah, right. And it's like, well, of course they didn't explore that, which is stupid. It's like, well, what happens if you replace somebody's blood with somebody, what happens if you get an infusion of midichlorians? Can you extract the midichlorians, put them in someone else? Can you give them more midichlorians? Can you get rid of their midichlorians? All these questions that are never even addressed because, it's just a throwaway thing of how he knows that he's got the Force. It's more interesting to me. It's like he just knows that he has the Force. That's what you do. You don't make it mundane. You nitwit. You ruined it. Oh, anyway, sorry, that's a different rant.
Yeah. So I actually have a question. I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. No, yes. You didn't get to ask me any questions, so
let's say for the sake of the argument, that the Bible is at the very least true in the sense that the majority of the events occurred, specifically the event, of Jesus' resurrection. That God, in that sense, is real. Would you follow him?
I don't know.
See, that's a question I like to ask a lot of people, because I had that issue too. Let's just say it's real. I still think he's tyrannical.
The problem is I have the God of the written word to go on, and that's my interpretation. I have to interpret all of that. I've never encountered the fellow. I've never met him. So maybe he's a nice guy. I don't know. I read it, seems like a jerk, so but that's basing it off of my subjective opinion. And I don't want to do that. I want to meet the person. I want to say, hi, how's it going? Have a conversation like you and I are having. It's like, it seems like a nice guy, and I can ask
the hiddenness of God.
Why are you, just have a talk, just talk to me, just have a conversation. Ultimately, I don't think that I could ever have a relationship with an entity that refuses to have a relationship with me.
Right.
And ultimately, God, as depicted in the Bible, and perhaps all gods, are a parasocial relationship. They're the sort of relationship you have with a giant YouTuber who doesn't notice you. They don't know you exist. You know they exist. You love them. You maybe you throw money at them. You every now and then maybe you get a like, a heart on your thing, and you're like, they noticed me, senpai noticed me, but they don't remember you they don't even remember you a second after they did that. So this parasocial relationship, I think it's that, but it's even worse because it's a parasocial relationship where you're writing letters of love and you're sending them off and you never get anything back. And I see no value in that. I've had that relationship on Earth with a human who I knew existed. Not fun.
Right.
Bunch of waste of time and energy, and it hurts you in the end. Why would I want to do that with a being of celestial magnitude or anything at all? No, but that's my projection of what it is. I haven't met the actual thing. So I don't know. I would change my channel if I could verify that these things were true. I would then incorporate that and say, here's the arguments, here's how that flows, here's how that works. And I would defend it with logic and reason, as I do with what I stand now, where essentially my epistemology is very simple to boil down: empirical methodology, repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument. And I don't have any of those for any god at all. Period.
No, and I had that issue too, in the sense that, like, how do you measure any of this?
Yeah,
because
that's the empirical or testable method. The last one is the valid and sound argument. Here's the interesting thing I learned about logic is, I have a light here, and we see that it's off. Well, that's great, and now I can turn it on, and okay. So if I make an argument, I say, well, premise one, lobsters exist. Premise two, if lobsters don't exist, then my light is off. Conclusion, well, they do exist, so my light is on. Well, there's some problems with that argument.
Right.
There's a lot of problems with that argument.
Right.
And so, because of the problems, in regards to the light being on or off, we'd actually have to be skeptical of it. We couldn't say it was on. We couldn't say it was off. Within logic itself, all we could say is, the argument sucks. Go fix your argument. Come back when you fixed your argument. Until then, I don't know. Maybe you're right, but I can't tell you. And the way to verify the premises, see if they contain fallacies, is to, look at reality. So we're back to the empirical methodology. We haven't actually we've given the illusion of departing empirical methodology when we use logic, but we haven't actually. And I don't know of any coherent argument that is both valid and sound that actually could argue for something that you couldn't verify in reality.
Right.
And what you see instead with all these apologetic arguments, you see arguments that base largely on intuition, based on ignorance, or appeals to feeling, or just bald assertions. So if X is true, Z is true. X is true, therefore Z. Like, that's great. Now show that X is true. Well, they can't do that, so they appeal to emotion to make it seem true, like with the moral argument or what have you. So,
the argument that morals can't come from nothing, or that argument.
They're objective and therefore God or what have you. And I'm like, well, what if morals are? What if some are objective but others aren't? Does God kind of exist?
Sure.
Or it's either God created everything or there's no God. I'm like, what if God created everything but exploded in order for everything to exist? So God did exist, but now it's dead in order to create the universe. Now what? Well, I never thought of that. That doesn't make sense. I'm like, but what if that's how it works? Now what? But back to your question. I mean, I don't know. I would have probably said, and I probably have said no in the past, because I would have based it on my understanding of the Bible. I probably wouldn't be a Christian in that sense, but I would support whatever the data says, whatever the truth
Okay.
is. That's all that matters to me. Is I want to know what is real, what is true, or as close as I can get to it. And with this being, even even if it happened yesterday, well, that's different because it puts it in a very different setting than a long time ago. We have access to things. People still are seeing Bigfoot, but we just don't have any good pictures or video of him for some reason. Even though everyone carries around, a thing that can video and photo people. Like, these are common now, whereas in the 80s they weren't. So okay, it's understandable that people wouldn't have cameras because this is like new too. This kind of camera is fairly new as well. We did, the cameras they had then were, they were expensive. So okay, but now it's all this technology where it's like that's cheap, and yet you don't have anything.
Right.
It's like Bigfoot's just really blurry. That's the problem. He's just really blurry in reality.
Right.
That's like when you see Bigfoot, he's just blurry. That's what you can't get a good photo of him. And the Loch Ness, the Loch Ness monster is actually just a whale's penis. I was like, well, that's great, but a whale can't live in that sort of lake. And so I'm like, no, it's a log.
In reality,
it's a log.
Like
it's a log.
He's just really far away.
Yeah, it's just a log. That's all it is.
He's just always really far away.
Yeah, he's always far away, right? So the difference is, of how, the question that you must ask, if you will, is would you be willing to question what you hold most dear, and would you even be willing to give it up if you were to find that it wasn't true?
Oh yeah, well, I do it every day. That's kind of what that's kind of why I'm more willing to talk than I think a lot of people. I think a lot of people are very like we talked about before the stream started, that people are threatened when their very closely held beliefs are very threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not very true for me. I'm very curious naturally, so I always want to know more. To answer your question in a way that's very truthful to me, is that I don't believe in faith in the same way other people, talk about it. I think people think of faith as always synonymous with blind faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just don't think that's true. For instance, I'll give you an example. If let's say I go to the bar, 3 nights a week, and I ride my horse there, and every night I get drunk, I get on my horse and it brings me back home. I have faith that horse is going to bring me back home because it does multiple times over.
Yeah, I would just call that assurance or confidence or something like that.
And I think that's a better way to think of at least my faith in God. It's not blind in that regard. It's a confidence that as I begin to see these things, and as more and more things are understood, that he's not just screwing with Abraham. Okay, well, now I understand he's not just screwing with Abraham. Like he's showing an allegory for how hard it would be to give up your own son as a sacrifice, and then does so later in the future. That's the kind of thing that leads me to faith, because the next time I don't understand something that God does, rather than treating it as like oh, well, now I can just throw the whole thing away. I treat it as well, I must be missing something, because I've seen too many times, too many stories, too many people in my life now that they have these experiences.
Yeah, on the logic front, you said something about disproving the resurrection, and do you recognize that fallacy?
In what regard? Oh, that it would be hard to disprove. Like, you can't disprove ghosts; you can only prove.
The burden isn't to disprove; the burden is to prove.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree. To some extent, there's an element of people, like I said, with this just thing about Justice Scalia, and that you could prove the resurrection in a court of law. You
I'd
lay
like
out all.
that trial.
Yeah, you should, it was not a trial. It was just an
Right,
episode.
right.
But
That's what I'm saying. I'd like to see it as an actual trial. Like it would be a mock trial. It wouldn't be a real trial, but I mean a trial in that we would have actual lawyers, an actual judge, an actual jury. And the thing is, I think we'd have to run it more than once. We would probably get, I would imagine we would get a bell curve.
Oh yeah, and that's my point, is that like I said, to submit something to a jury, you have to get to a point where a reasonable jury could believe, right, that a fact is either true or not, to make a decision. Otherwise, a judge is going to take that decision away from the jury.
Right.
So his what he puts forth then is that there's enough evidence here. There's enough eyewitness testimony, among other things, that the resurrection happened. Mm-hmm. So now it's up to, all the evidence is in front of you, and it's up to you to determine whether it's real or not.
Yeah,
and that's the same setting I came to. Yeah, like if you genuinely have a being that is outside of time and space because it created time and space, you can't measure that with a ruler. You can't weigh that with a scale. There's no level of like scientific evidence that I think you can put forward to prove God.
Well, there is a simple,
but I think there are things that hint to a higher power. Mathematics being a big one. Just how perfect our universe is finely tuned and things like that.
Is it though? I mean, or is that just a misperception of?
I've thought that too. Like, oh well, if the universe weren't this finely tuned, it couldn't exist, or it would exist in a very different fashion.
Yeah, if things were different, then things would be different, and we would be different if we're a thing at all. So whatever it is, like, yeah. But if you want to hint that you exist, then just say that you exist. Why play this game?
That's
there's a thing in the Bible.
How would you do it?
There's a thing in the Bible. If two or more gathered in my name, and all that, and whatever you ask will be given to you. It's like, it seems like there's a test here, and I always do the very simple test. Okay, I'm gonna do it again, God. Get this thing off my head. Go on, come on, get it off my head. Knock it off. Do something. Mm-hmm. Nothing ever happened. Right. Now, if I move my head, I can get it to fall.
The hiddenness of God.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, make this levitate. Nothing happens. And you're, why not? Just say hi. Just come and clarify it for all of us. What are you waiting for? Why do this? Because according to, I don't know how, the last time I saw Pew Research, I don't know if they've done it lately, but they had about 33%-ish of the world believes in Christianity.
Yep.
That means everybody else is screwed. But then it's not even that.
Well, probably not even that. Probably more than 33%.
It's more than that,
smaller number.
Right. It's a smaller number.
People are going to go there.
And then it's not even that because, during the time of Christ, people that didn't know who Christ was, where did they go when they died? And somebody in China, they had their own beliefs. They didn't know anything about what was going on in this little tiny dot of the world, So none of it all sparks of human invention. Like, every religion is regional. Every religion is one point on the map, one point in time where God reveals itself to one or a group of people, but never to the entire world all at once in a way that we could not be mistaken about it. And
I've had issues with this, and what I've come to a conclusion of is that there are more than one way. There is more than one way to have a relationship with Christ, and I think that people find that relationship outside of modern Christianity. I think that Native Americans who were here, you would not call them a specific Christian because they didn't believe in the facts that I believe. I believe many of them had a relationship with God that was not, how the Jews saw it. and I think that's really important, is the Jews clearly were wrong. At least according to Christianity, they clearly were wrong. They thought Jesus was going to come as this conqueror who was going to free them from the oppression of Rome. And no, he didn't. He came as a humble carpenter's son. And what he did was he died for the sins of everyone from zero to ad infinitum time to whenever the world ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's
but see,
is a
it's not for everybody though. That's the problem with the system.
What do you mean?
Well, it's only if you believe in it.
Right. Well, it says only those who go through Christ get to God, right?
Right. So it's not for everybody then. It's conditioned.
But I honestly
don't
believe
it's not unconditional.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Part of the problem is that because God's whole MO is free will, right? Not only does he have to accept you, which he does, you also have to accept him. And like I said, that's why I asked you that question of, even if you could say with 100% confidence that all of it was true, would you believe? And I think most people would say no, because it's not about proof for a lot of people. It's about,
I would believe, but I wouldn't follow.
Right.
I wouldn't worship.
Right. Exactly, because a lot of people think of this tyrannical figure.
Yeah. Well, are you familiar with the logical fallacy ad ballum?
I don't recognize that. No.
Okay. Appeal to the cudgel or appeal to the stick.
Okay.
I might be mispronouncing it. I also say ad baculum, and I never can't remember.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me get it here.
Kind of just, he is God, so now listen. Is that what you're getting at?
Hold on. Let me get this, because my words ability is always failing me. Let's see. Argument ad baculum, baculum.
Okay.
Baculum. Let's see. I don't know. So it's fallacy when one makes an appeal to force to bring about the acceptance of a conclusion. So do this or else, or give me all your money. Well, yeah, you're going to give me your money, but not because you want to, but because the threat is implied that I'm going to shoot you or hurt you in some way, shape, or form. So, give me your money. Do you have free will?
I understand your point, but I think you're misunderstanding.
But do you have free will in this moment?
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Why?
But I don't think it's an accurate representation of what's occurring, because it's more like, I build a house for you and I offer for you to live in it, and you say, no, I'd rather go live in the woods. I also don't agree personally with the argument or the idea that hell is forever for humans. So there's two ways that the Bible talks about hell. And sometimes it'll say like the place where the worm never dies. And some people believe that's actually talking about a worm that'll chew you up. I think it's mistranslated and means a worm as in a dragon, right? WYRM. And the dragon's the devil, right? In the biblical interpretation. So in that verse, it's saying that it's a place for angels where they will go, the angels who have fallen, and they will never die. However, for humans, there's often verses that'll say, the place where the soul dies or the soul burns up. If the idea is that with God you live forever, then with him, why would you also live forever in hell? I just don't see the example. So you actually do, if you actually experience death, you actually experience spiritual death and physical death if you don't, accept Christ. At least in my interpretation of that. So I'm not in the camp that hell is forever. And when like I said, I had this feeling that God was tyrannical. He's the guy with the gun that you just kind of mentioned, saying, follow me or else. But I don't, I don't fall into that camp anymore, because I have a new understanding of what free will is. And it's literally a choice. Do you want to live forever in this world that I created? No. Okay. You don't have to. You still get punished for the crimes you committed on this earth, but there's also a way out of that if you know, accept the perfect defense attorney, Jesus, you know, like that's that's as simple as it gets. Like I thought of it as a very tyrannical force for a long, long time, and when I didn't, that's when I started to change my thinking because I had that question too. Like, okay, well, let's say it is all real. What do I care? When I was researching this stuff, because I'm still not going to follow him anyway, because I think he's tyrannical. But now that I have a different understanding of all the events that occurred, I don't think they're tyrannical at all.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, you have the fallacy of appeal to a bribe. I built you this beautiful house. All you have to do is kiss my foot, and you can have it.
Ironically, though, it's the other way around. Is that I built you this beautiful house and I died for you and forgave you of all the bad things you've ever done. Do you want to come hang out?
No, but you have to believe, you have to do this thing to get the thing. Is what I'm saying.
You have to be in a relationship with him.
Yeah,
You mentioned
right.
something early on. Yeah, you
I
mentioned
built this.
something
I
early
built
on.
this wonderful house. You can live here, but we got to be friends. I don't even know you. You know, like, well,
Right.
you can live in my,
No.
but it's not based on logic, is it? Though it's based on
But
you. This
would you
house
let random
is really
people in your
great.
house?
This house is really great. Oh, but see, it's not random. He knows everyone, right?
Right. But you have to accept. Sorry, that's my wife. You have to accept him too. Like
Yeah.
it's both.
I mean, I might be willing to, but I can't even talk to the guy, so I'm not sure how I'm supposed to accept. But all right,
Yeah,
so I think
I've had issues with the hiddenness of God stuff
yeah,
too,
yeah.
and kind of you asked
Well,
me
it's
a little bit about my journey. Kind of,
mhm,
I'll tell you the final step that
okay.
I came to where I was just like I can't really not be anymore. I had come to a point where I had agreed with everything. I had so I understood the faith. I understood the logic and reasoning behind it. I had even gotten to a point where I said like I don't think God's tyrannical anymore.
Hmm.
And I was I just was waiting for that moment for God to step in and say like, "Hey, I'm real," um, which I didn't need because I had already believed it. But I don't know, there was something about it too where I was like, I didn't like this hiddenness of God thing. And specifically, this is how God spoke to me. I don't think this is how He speaks to everybody. But my wife and I went to the dog park one evening. We had had a sort of rough week because I had wrecked one of our cars, and so we were just down to one car. Uh, and so we drove this car to the dog park. Our dogs ran around for about an hour or so, and it was snowy and slushy that day. So when we get back to the truck, um, I ask her to hand me the keys, and she doesn't know where they are, and she's like patting herself down. I was like, oh. So we start looking through the dog park through all this slush and snow, trying to find like if they fell, they're gone, right? It was a nightmare. And we're there for about an hour and a half. It's starting to get dark. We're asking people like, "Hey, if you see these, let us know." And at this point, I had been, um, I was not 100%, you know, sure about Christianity, even though I had these, you know, all the logic and understanding and everything put in front of me. I still, I would do things like I was very grateful for this turkey stew that I had, I had made out of a turkey that I actually hunted, and I started praying over it, just like, hey, whoever you know gave me the ability to get this, thank you, kind of a thing. So I was about at that point, and I was at this dog park. It was dark. It was cold. We couldn't find our keys. And I'd asked a few people to help out, and some people were just kind of absentmindedly looking or whatever. And finally, I'm standing there. I look up in the sky, and I'm like, "All right, I I don't know what else to do here. I'm kind of lost. Please, if you're out there, please help me find these keys because we don't even have to get way to get home right now." And as I'm saying this, some lady from behind me, she's like, "Oh my gosh, I just found your keys." Is literally as I was doing it, and I was like, I turn around, I'm like, I might be legally obligated to be a Christian now. Like it just just happened, but yeah, it was pretty. It was a little on the nose for me because as a deist, I had told people I don't think God helps you find your keys. You know, I think he's probably out there, but he's not out there helping people find their keys. And then my thing that I always say happened to me. So I don't think it'll happen to everybody, and I can't I can't say anything other than that. But yeah, that was kind of my last little straw that broke the camel's back moment for me, I guess.
Okay, we had at least one. I was trying to get more questions. I should have prepared a little bit better. Um, one question for you from chat was, how do you define a soul?
A soul. That's an interesting question. Um, I suppose a soul would be whatever is operating our physical body. There's not really a better way. You know, your spiritual life is a soul. It's a what I would consider a form of energy. But
Mhm.
that's a good question. I don't know. Are we
Okay.
running out of time, or
Yeah,
are
yeah.
you
It's
just
just
okay?
it's been an hour, so I kind of wanted to wrap up
Oh,
a bit.
yeah,
Uh, So thank you for your time. I mean, we of course we could talk about this on and on,
yeah.
because well, I mean, it's interesting to me. It's interesting to other people, and next time maybe you'll pepper me with questions, and perhaps you'll have your historical Jesus, and
Sure.
email me whatever you have on that so I can
Yep.
look
Yeah.
over
No,
it.
that's how law
Uh,
works. So if you want to do
yeah,
that, I got to
yeah.
give it to the other side.
Right, right, right. Yeah, the
Yep.
whole surprise witness thing, I think that doesn't happen at
No,
all.
not
That
typically.
just
No, that's pretty
okay. So
rare.
there is a surprise witness thing. You can do that, guys. I thought that was just for
It's
television.
incredibly rare. It's mostly for TV.
Yeah.
It's incredibly rare. It's just kind of like if for whatever reason I just found out about this person, especially if the other side was acting in bad faith and they, didn't they tried to hide this person from me, then I might be able to do a surprise witness because it's not actually a surprise witness. Hey, thank you, whoever said that. I had a good time.
Meg Crystal says thank you. Do you
But
have
yeah,
a
it's more of
channel?
a movie thing.
Yeah. Anything?
I don't have a channel. I don't really intend on doing so, but I'm happy to pop
Yeah.
in with
I was
with
gonna
more
say
research
whatever.
whenever you want.
Yeah, I was gonna say whatever
Yeah.
Doug has. I'll link whatever socials or whatever he wants me to link to in the description. He can throw random links at me in the email, and I'll just be like, "Sure, I'll put that up there. I don't care, whatever.
I'm
It's a professional channel. What do I care?"
gonna start a channel called Converted Man, and we'll be enemies.
I've never heard that joke before. Uh,
But yeah, no, I had a good time. It was
yeah,
a
yeah.
good conversation more than anything. But I'm more than willing to
Yeah,
try
yeah.
to open debate
I
type
look
setting if you
forward.
want.
I look forward to it, and I thank you for your time and energy.
Yeah,
And we'll, I guess we'll say we'll see. For now, we're adjourned. Oh, stick around while I hit the red button for everybody else. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Go ahead and say something cool.
yeah, something cool.